Hello, everyone, and welcome to today's webinar, Patient-Centric RWE Research and Remote Monitored Care, Learnings from a Support Program Leveraging Telehealth and Connected Devices, sponsored by Self-Care Catalysts. I'm Dana Minyard, Associate Director of Technology for Scientist.com, the parent company of HealthEconomics.com. Thank you for taking time to join us in our ongoing webinar series. We're really glad that you're here today. Let's go over some very brief housekeeping so you can participate fully in today's event. You should see an attendee interface on the right-hand corner of your desktop. You're listening in using your computer's speaker system by default. If you would prefer to join over the phone, just select phone call in the audio pane and the dial-in information will be displayed. Today's webinar will be very interactive. Please submit your questions for our speakers at any time during the webinar through the questions pane of your control panel. We will address as many as possible at the end of the webinar. We are recording the webinar and the full presentation will be available on demand. The link to view it will be sent to you within an hour or so at the end of the webinar. We invite you to visit healtheconomics.com and take advantage of the large number of resources available across the continuum of healthcare value, evidence, and access. Visit the website for up-to-date news, career opportunities, and resources, such as blog interviews with industry leaders, white papers, benchmarking reports, and more. We have a number of upcoming and archived webinars that may be of interest to you or others in your organization. Tomorrow, join ActuReal and us for value-based agreements. Are we going to see more or less of them? We also have hundreds of webinars in archive, all free for you to view. And now it's my pleasure to introduce Dr. Patty Peoples. Patty is a health economist, pharmacist, and industry leader with 35 years of experience in healthcare value, evidence, and access. She is founder and CEO of HealthEconomics.com, and she also serves as Vice President of Evidence and Content for Scientist.com, the parent company of HealthEconomics.com. Extensively published in the peer-reviewed literature, Dr. Peoples also serves on several journal editorial boards where she works to increase the quality of published evidence and improve value communications. And now it's my pleasure to turn the presentation over to Dr. Peoples.
Thanks so much, Dana, and welcome to everyone that's joining us today online. We're really glad that you're here. Let me introduce you to today's speakers. Please meet Tanya Winders. Tanya is the president and CEO of the Allergy and Asthma Network, the leading patient advocacy organization dedicated to ending the needless death and suffering due to asthma, allergies, and related conditions. Tanya has over 20 years of experience in leadership roles within the allergy and asthma industry, ranging from sales and marketing leadership to managed market access. She has worked tirelessly to ensure that patients have access to effective diagnostic and treatment tools. Tanya also serves on several expert panels, including the ATS Public Advisory Roundtable and the GINA International Guidelines. She's the current president of the Global Allergy and Airways Patient Platform, representing more than 50 patient organizations throughout the world. We're really honored to have you here today, Tanya.
Thanks, Patty. Good to see you.
And please welcome Dr. Renee Willman. Renee is the Director of Evidence at Self-Care Catalyst, a digital health company specializing in patient-reported RWE that places the patient at the center of human networks, technology, and science. With a background in forensic anthropology, Renee brings a very unique perspective to real-world evidence, integrating traditional clinical data sets with novel forms of patient-reported data to better understand the patient journey. Welcome, Renee. I'm really honored to share the podium with you today. All right, audience, let's kick it off with a couple of polls, shall we? Please let us know where you stand on this. What is your experience collaborating directly with patients or patient organizations? You can choose as many that apply. You do it in the realm of research planning, study design, and execution. Yes, you have experience with study recruitment or registry studies with patient organizations. Yes, in limited engagements. Yes, as partners or ongoing stakeholders. Or no, but I'm interested in working more closely with patients. Choose all that apply. While you're doing that, it's a great opportunity to remind you one more time, please use that question pane on your control panel. And while the speakers are speaking, just shoot us whatever questions you have, and we will get to as many as possible at the end of our presentation. All right, let's see where the poll stands. Well, it looks like about half of you have indeed used patient or patient organization collaboration in the form of planning your studies or executing them, and almost as many for recruiting. About a quarter of you have done so in a rather limited way, and about a quarter of you are brand new to it. Well, wherever you're sitting on that continuum, you're really in the right place. We've got two organizations that have done some really, I think, very innovative collaboration and data collection, and in fact, working on a program that directly impacts positive health outcomes. So there'll be something for you to learn no matter where you stood on that. All right, let's take a look at poll number 2, Dana. Please let us know where you are. All that apply, again, I have experience leveraging the following types of patient-reported data and research: with PROs, wearable or device data, social media listening, prospectively collected qualitative or free text data, or nothing yet, but you're interested. All right, let's see what those results show us. Well, almost 2/3 of you have collected with EPROs, not surprising. And also not surprising, increasing numbers of you are getting direct experience with that wearable or device data. Least common is social media listening. And about 40% you've prospectively collected free text or qualitative data. Thank you, that's really, really going to be helpful as our speakers put this into context. Well, now I would like to invite Tanya Winders to showcase what she's been doing with Self-Care Catalyst and with her Allergy and Asthma Network. Tanya, take it away.
Thank you, Patty. I appreciate the opportunity to be here today and to share a bit about the partnership that Allergy and Asthma Network has in the program, Not One More Life. Our Trusted Messenger program. This is a program that actually was started about 20 years ago with doing live events for asthma screening and asthma education in underserved communities. We initially did that through a partnership with faith-based organizations, churches, and schools, and then moved to more community-based organizations over the years. But when the COVID pandemic hit, we saw a great spotlight shining on the health inequities and health disparities that we had long recognized at Allergy and Asthma Network in our particular community. And so we adapted our Not One More Life program and came up with a concept of the Trusted Messengers Project to offer free asthma, COPD, and COVID screenings, as well as vaccination, but then to identify a high-risk community and to enroll them in a health coaching program virtually during the pandemic. And so the next slide goes on to speak a bit more about the background of the minorities and COVID-19 and what we know. What we came to understand very quickly is that minority populations bore a disproportionate burden of that morbidity and mortality of respiratory illnesses like asthma and COPD. But then during the pandemic, we also saw, not surprisingly, that COVID-19 was disproportionately impacting the community as well. And so we took our established relationship with local institutions and with faith-based organizations, community-based organizations, and began to offer these community-based opportunities to engage the community. And so this really was built on a holistic approach that starts fundamentally with trust. We know that, again, we cannot address the more systemic issues without first acknowledging that there are valid reasons why the trust has been lost in these communities over the years with the scientific community and the healthcare community. So how do we begin to build on that trust by addressing health inequities and increasing access to important health information and screenings for persons of color? And think back to, I know it seems like a very long time ago, but think back to that time frame of sort of May, June, July of 2020. This is when we were seeing, again, that there was not equal access to things like COVID testing. And certainly, even when the vaccine became available in the fall, we did not see these things as universally available. And so this project really was aimed at how do we increase access, but also improve those long-term health outcomes for those living with uncontrolled respiratory disease and living in underserved minority communities. Next slide. So the way that we designed the program, as I said before, was a combined approach, including a live component and a digital component, where we did live and digital screening events, and that we actually, again, went out to those trusted messengers, whether they be churches or community partners, through Facebook and other targeted efforts online to reach the community that we thought most needed these services. The attendees were provided with support to address the more systemic issues. I often say, you know, this takes me back to Psych 101 with Maslow's hierarchy of needs. And we cannot talk about self-empowerment or self-actualization without first addressing some of the fundamental needs around food security, housing security, education, poverty. And so we offered a lot of these services. We offered health assessments free of charge, food vouchers, PPE, and just a number of different services there on site for the live events. Once we screened that larger population, then we stratified them based off of their risk of underlying respiratory disease and the degree of control of that disease. And so those eligible patients that were in the high risk category were then enrolled in a 16-week free program of virtual health coaching. So these health coaches are either nurses, physician assistants, or respiratory therapists who also maintain the certified asthma educator credentialing. And so we use the Self-Care Catalyst Health Storylines application, mobile application, to do that screening, but also to follow those patients and engage with those patients over the 16 weeks. And so there were different components of monitoring that group by using the app and the tools within the app, but also some external remote monitoring devices like pulse oximetry, spirometry, and even exhalation breath monitoring during sleep. We also accessed asthma, COPD, and COVID-19 education information that the Allergy and Asthma Network had created and tailored specifically to this high-risk community. And then we had them contribute to the research by completing surveys. Again, we've already talked about the importance of EPROs, and so we incorporated those as well as patient and coach satisfaction in the overall evaluation of the program. Next slide. So what are some of the metrics? How did the program work? Again, this was a pilot program that was focused just on Atlanta in the months of September through March of September 2020 through March of 2021. We screened over 1,200 patients during that time. And what we realized that there were 156 eligible patients who met our inclusion criteria. Of those, 72 patients were enrolled in the program. In the meantime, we had over 1,000 patients that were tested for COVID-19 with a positive rate of just under 2%. We also distributed over 3,000 mask, glove, and hand sanitizers, different PPE materials, and over 1,000 food and flu vouchers during that time. And what we saw as we engaged these individuals in the community, we asked them to download the Health Storylines app, to then interact with the app on an ongoing basis. And then we pushed out education messaging and materials over the course of the time. On a weekly basis, they met with their health coach and talked about what were their individual barriers to achieving their best health outcomes. And then we, through motivational interviewing and shared decision making, actually set goals and help them to achieve those goals over time. And the impact was so remarkable and so inspiring. Actually, you can see one of the quotes here where a patient was very honest with their coach to say, you know, today was a rough day. I'm feeling really depressed. I keep forgetting to use my prescribed inhaler. You know, I'm really not having trouble with my other meds, but I pray that this coaching service will help me to remember to take my controller medication more readily and frequently. So overall, what we saw through the 72 patients enrolled in the program was a significant positive impact on their overall health, resulting in improved quality of life, improvement in lung function, reduced frequency of rescue inhaler use or short-acting bronchodilator, and we had a significant insight into adherence behaviors. So there was a great advancement and understanding in these 72 patients, consequently, but it also provided the insights and the foundation for us to expand this program and to move nationally in 2021. And so to date, we've expanded to 6 additional cities in addition to Atlanta, and the program continues to expand with more patients enrolled in the coach program today. We have modified the program to now only be 6 weeks. We found that we got the same positive health outcomes in a 6-week program as the 16-week program. So some adaptation based off of the lessons learned. Next slide. And so now I'm going to turn it over. I think we have another poll from Patty before we move to the Self-Care Catalyst team explaining more about the application and the tools that they offer. Patty?
Thanks so much, Tanya. That was a great overview, and I'm really interested. As you were planning this comprehensive program and you want to develop a program that can enable the collection of a variety of different patient outcomes, including adherence and day-to-day perspectives on their health, how did you go about choosing Self-Care Catalyst as your partner for the Trusted Messengers program?
Yes, well, that's a really great question. I mean, we actually evaluated several different platforms. We wanted a real-world data collection tool that would allow us that flexibility of understanding, you know, when patients were taking their medication and offer medication reminders. Also, we wanted to incorporate mental health because we knew the stress and strain that the pandemic was placing on individuals. So that mood tracker was very important. The symptom tracker, very easy to use. But the thing that probably sold us at the end of the day was a true partnership. We believed wholly in Grace and her team at Self-Care Catalyst and the way that they listened to us and adapted that real-world data collection to exactly what we needed to make this work. They also offered that ability within a single platform to conduct virtual visits and for the coach to have a dashboard to integrate all of those remote monitoring tools. So it was that more holistic approach that we were looking for, not only to capture the real world data, but then to put it into a meaningful format for our coaches to use in those weekly visits.
Thank you so much. That's very helpful. And I know that we're going to have Renee dive a little deeper into the program and also give our listeners a way to better understand how this particular platform of Self-Care Catalyst can be used across different disease states. Before we jump into Renee's presentation, let's go to a poll. And Tanya, you'll be back online for our Q&A. So audience, let us hear from you, please. What aspect of prospective data collection do you find is your greatest challenge? Choose all that apply. Is it recruitment? Is it patient engagement? Or what about that patient loss to follow-up? Or integrating multiple sources of data? Or what about working with multiple stakeholders? Which ones of these are your greatest challenges? All right, let's see what those results show. Well, it looks like that we have 2/3 of you say the bear is recruitment, because without recruitment, nothing else happens, right? Interestingly, the managing multiple stakeholders and patient engagement are not as challenging as is integrating multiple sources of data. And honestly, I'm quite surprised by that. I'll be interested to see what Renee thinks of that. The second most challenging area is that loss to follow-up. So really just that intersection with the patient and keeping them enrolled seems to be so challenging. Thanks, audience. I appreciate that. All right, Renee, I'd like to invite you on camera and we will turn the presentation over to you.
Perfect. Thank you so much, Patty, and thank you, Tanya, for such a wonderful description of the program that we were able to execute. And I just want to first touch on a couple of the principles that we operate on at Self-Care Catalyst that really drove some of those differentiating features that Tanya spoke about. And that is that the 3 pillars that our platform is really based upon is a high touch, high science, and high tech approach. We really feel that the human aspect and the empathy component of healthcare is very important to involve patients as active participants in research. For a very long time, patients have been considered to be subjects or not necessarily viewed as equal stakeholders in the process, and that is one component that really impacts how we engage with patients. There's certainly a proliferation of digital tools in the marketplace that can be used to digitize the collection of data, and COVID-19 really drove the adoption of many of those tools. But by linking our technical capabilities of the platform with a scientific approach that is incorporating both social science and clinical science with high touch through partnerships with groups like the Allergy and Asthma Network, but also working very closely with the patients that interact with our platform every day, we're able to really knit these 3 principles together to really wrap around our product and the platform and make sure that it is used in a way that reduces that loss to follow-up that so many of you are concerned about. Next slide, please. And so to give a little bit more context about our platform before I talk more about this program and what we learned throughout it that can be applied to other studies, there are 3 components of our platform that drove this study. One is the Health Storylines mobile app, which Tanya described was distributed through the course of the study to all of the patients that were screened. And this app can be customized and personalized both by the sponsor organization as well as the patients themselves to act as a personalized digital support, a source where they can engage not only with other stakeholders in a research or care program, but with their own personalized circle of support. And this can be tailored to be a research-ready data collection platform that operates in real time and longitudinally. So unlike a traditional ePro study where you would be collecting data at very specific time points, we can also layer in the use of the tools that Tanya described by the patient's own volition. When they may be up in the middle of the night with an exacerbation or symptoms, they can journal about it. And so by seeing when patients engage with that app, we also gain additional insight. And then on the back end of that, you have Health Storylines Creator, which is where a project manager, a study coordinator, a health coach, or even a physician's office can monitor a cohort of patients and see in real time the data that they're reporting, or use it for virtual visits. Now, this data can be used as a clinical decision support tool to help understand what patients are going through outside of that clinical setting and tailor their care accordingly. So it can be used in care as well as research operations. And then we have a visualization dashboard called Health Storylines Analytics, which is where we have the aggregated and de-identified data of all of the patients that use our platform. And so this can give us insights into a population or cohort to help design a study, to select relevant endpoints, as well as to identify populations for recruitment. And then this allows us to look at what are the overall trends, medication adherence, which products are being used by which patients, to deliver not only insights and recommendations for the care of patients, but also for the design of studies and projects, and then tailor engagement programs so that we can reduce those numbers of patients that may be lost over time. Next slide. And so I want to talk a little bit sequentially about the different phases of the research and how our approach and these tools that I just described really unfolded through the course of this project, and what we learned that will be, of course, that we already implement in many of the other ongoing programs that we're working in, but that can be leveraged in other studies. The first is the growing recognition of the importance of diversity in clinical trials and community health programs. Now, it's of course important to have a representative sample, and more digital tools are allowing us greater access to a more diverse population. And because of the ability with digital tools to tailor them to these populations, we can layer in cultural awareness and sensitivity into the language that is used, into the way that we're approaching those patients initially. In this case, it was working with those already established trusted messengers of the faith-based organizations and other stakeholders within these minority communities that we knew would help connect to patients. And the other is the need to acknowledge the whole person. Tanya spoke about the importance of the Daily Moods tool. We also have a tool called Healthy Doses, where alongside a patient's journey with asthma, they may have other comorbidities, there may be mental health impacts. Throughout COVID, and especially early on, some of the risks to someone's ability to go to work, their exposure to different risk factors in the community and the environment, seasonal allergies, anything along those lines, need to be taken into account at the recruitment stage, so that we are designing programs that patients can join and know that they will be able to manage that project and provide their data in an ongoing manner, that it's sustainable, and also that we're reaching that correct patient population for the research goals. And the other is that by leveraging our digitally enabled care and real-world evidence data collection approach, we can access multiple recruitment strategies in tandem. So in this case, we use tailored Facebook ads and social media alongside in-person events. And going forward, we're exploring some additional innovative ways to reach patients in underserved communities that may not have access to something like a stable internet connection or the technology that you would need to roll out a study of this kind. And the other is the importance of really leveraging existing communities. Patients, before we go out to try and find them, for participation in whatever studies that we all are carrying out, whether in an academic context, in HEOR or clinical development, there's already communities of patients, and that's where that high touch component of collaborating with existing trusted messengers, whether those are those patient communities that are being served by an organization like Allergy and Asthma Network, or self-organized. We've tried to create opportunities within the Health Storylines platform for patients to self-organize their own circles of support. And often we find when we recruit for studies and for programs from our own patient base, our patients are able to refer the program to others in their community. So by really connecting with those patients on an individual level, we're able to recruit them into programs faster and know that we will retain them through the study for longer as well. And so that goes into my next slide. Concerning engagement. And in this program, we really used the existing knowledge we had about these patients from the data we had in our platform. And we saw that this was extremely effective in keeping them engaged throughout the program. Over those 16 weeks, we had very high retention rates and over 14,000 interactions with the core tools in our app. So per user, those 72 patients that participated in the intervention program, they had an average of over 86 app sessions. So we know that they were logging into their app and interacting with it in some way, at least on a daily basis. And they were really engaging not only in providing data for the objectives of the study, but because it was a tool that was designed to also provide them with educational materials in mechanisms such as videos or infographics that were easy to consume, it was also meeting their needs as a patient and putting their experience of respiratory health in context with what was happening more broadly in the pandemic. And they were being provided with resources that made everyday interaction with the app beneficial for them at an individual level, in addition to then driving the research goals of collecting more data. By design, the one-on-one health coaching and being able to execute those relationships via telehealth really strengthened this program, so that while this initial data is being reported from our pilot in Atlanta, as Tanya mentioned, we are able to now expand across other geographies and to recruit patients who may not live close to a center where a program like this might have traditionally been held. And then the other component is that because we're collecting this data in real time, patients can use the journal tool or report their mood at any time, multiple times a day. Seeing all of this data come in on our dashboards and being able to respond to it immediately allows us to develop relevant content based on insights that the patients are providing themselves. So this responsiveness that our platform allows in a program, while it may not be something that you would change something like the endpoints in a study midstream, you could potentially make sure that you're reaching out to patients in a timely manner or addressing some of their other concerns in a supportive manner so that they can stay in the study longer and continue to provide the data that is required. Next slide. And so that speaks a little bit to the data strategy in terms of being able to measure the changes in outcomes and how this program was actually serving the needs of these patients. We wanted to integrate multiple sources of data so that we could validate some of our hypotheses and cross-reference the evidence that was coming in from these different avenues. And so this is one area where our platform really shines, is that because we're not restricting the collection of data to specific time points, but allowing the patients to drive their own data, the data collection mechanism in their hands, we get a lot more insight into the day-to-day activities of the patient that are outside of that clinical setting. And as you all know, and I'm sure are familiar, most of the data that's used to make decisions in real-world evidence are coming from clinical settings or claims data. So this is a very rich source of patient-reported data, where we can combine validated EPRO with something like qualitative data that the patient provides that can help us identify those unknown unknowns, or are there questions that we simply don't know that we should be asking. It helps us to identify novel themes and new hypotheses to test in the research or in subsequent projects. And then we can also learn the patient language and values. And this feeds back into multiple dimensions of the study, whether it's engagement and how we're going to reach back to those patients. It may be passed downstream in the product development lifecycle and used by a brand team or marketing so that they can reach out to patients in a manner that's meaningful. And it also can help identify unmet needs. And this is particularly relevant in conditions such as rare types of cancers or rare disease, where there may not be a validated EPRO, or we may not necessarily know that much. A natural history study, for example, can leverage this data in a very powerful way to gain insight into the everyday lives of these patients and where they need support. And then because we can collect data not only from the patients, but also through the Health Storylines creator component of the platform, we also get input from stakeholders such as health coaches, from their providers, even the research staff when they reach out to patients to follow up if someone's perhaps having difficulty completing all of the assessments. We get a sense of what is this real source of truth, because we're able to combine and triangulate multiple lines of evidence and bring in those mixed methods approach in a longitudinal manner. And so you can see some of these examples that are provided directly by patients, where there are variables that would be important and that would help us interpret something that might be reported in the symptom tracker, but that may not necessarily be a global variable that affects the whole population. For example, the house fire on a patient's street, and so there would be smoke that would exacerbate their asthma. This might drive a difference in medication adherence that, unless we had that qualitative data, we wouldn't know how to contextualize that. Next slide. And so this can also help drive research operations and the ability to either scale a study if there's a need to reach a broader number of patients, or just to meet a minimum recruitment number in a condition where patients are very geographically distributed. We can quickly initiate new studies and sites with this digital platform, and we can rapidly screen patients, recruit them with e-consent modules and video libraries for onboarding. It makes it very user-friendly on the patient to participate in research. And because they tend to be very engaged in the platform and the app as a tool that helps them in their day-to-day, this also results in higher data quality because the patient is incentivized through its benefit to their own condition to use it on a regular basis. Other benefits of the platform are to obviously use it for remote monitoring and engagement, so you're no longer relying on a geographic site or particular study staff to be in a given location. You can reach people globally. And because we can review this data in a real-time basis, we can identify either non-compliance in a study. So if a patient is not completing their assessments, we can proactively reach out to correct that and get them back on track. And we can also efficiently capture and report things like adverse events or other events that might either disqualify a patient from continuing in a study or any other operational needs like that. The single hub for study resources can be very helpful to house everything from e-consent, educational materials, etc. Really streamlines the process of data management. And then we can integrate the research goals with the patient and physician needs. So more and more we want to see research as a care option, the ability for patients in a cancer trial to be able to incorporate the care that they're getting from a social worker or an occupational therapist. And so this way the platform creates a single source of truth of the patient's experience beyond that clinical setting, where all of the data is also being collected. So it gives a very comprehensive and holistic view of the patient's day-to-day reality. Next slide. And so we often get questions of how and when might this approach be incorporated. This, of course, is a very specific example in the allergy and asthma space in the context of a global pandemic. So it's very specific to respiratory. However, many of these learnings that we've just discussed can be applied not only across different conditions, but across the product development life cycle or in biotech and in many different cases where you want to collect data from patients. So for example, in clinical development, things like natural history studies requiring real-world evidence to inform patient journeys and to really understand patients and how they're engaging with each other and what the standard of care may look like. That early characterization of what patients are going through can be leveraged in those contexts. But we can also use that in the HEOR real-world evidence phase in parallel to phase 2 or 3 trials to better understand real-world patterns of care. Any patient-reported outcome or quality of life studies can leverage this platform and this approach to access a more representative group of patients and to collect data to really complement those structured and more traditional methods of data collection. And when we talk about looking at data for a value story or reimbursement planning, there are many other webinars on this platform about defining value and how value-based outcomes can be leveraged and considered. When we have language and experience directly from patients to characterize quality of life in a more rich manner, this brings about many more opportunities to really understand what does value look like from the patient's perspective. And then when we layer in that ability to follow the provider's interaction through the Health Storylines Creator component, then we have a really holistic look of what care is looking like and where it's effective and how it can be improved. So this ability to focus on, measure, and then drive improved patient outcomes throughout the entire research lifecycle is really baked into our process. And at the heart of that, again, is that combination of high touch, considering the patient's needs and what their day-to-day reality is, alongside that high tech and high science approach. Next slide. So now I think we're very happy to take any questions, and if anyone is interested in how they can be part of projects like this, are interested in publications or case studies in other therapeutic areas, I'd be very happy to follow up offline as well.
Thanks so much, Renee. That was really helpful for me to see all of the different potential applications that there are for the app. And I'm really quite intrigued with when you talked a little bit about using it for data for a value story. Talk to us a little bit about some of the other therapeutic areas that you have experience with this application.
Absolutely. Well, we do have experience with a number of therapeutic areas in formal programs like this, whether they're research for HEOR or Med Affairs, as well as post-marketing, everything from post-authorization safety studies for vaccinations, rare cancer conditions, heart failure, neuroendocrine tumors, migraine, really any condition. We have 100,000 patients who are using this platform, many of whom organically found the app just in an attempt to find a tool to manage their disease. And of course, many may have comorbidities or may not even have a concrete diagnosis at some point. And so by having such access to a rich database of patients with a variety of experience, we're able to really understand that patient journey and design a study that can provide these quality of life insights in really any condition.
And Tanya, you have been in this leadership role with the Asthma and Allergy Network and sit on many guideline development organizations. How else have you leveraged the insights that you have gained from this particular relationship that you've established with self-care and with the application that you've used in this Trusted Messenger program?
Well, you know, it really has touched the organization in so many different ways. So number one, Allergy and Asthma Network has been around since 1985 and dedicated to the same mission of ending needless death and suffering due to asthma, allergies, and related conditions. But our 4 mission areas of outreach, education, advocacy, and research. Now in outreach, it's how do we raise awareness? And these digital recruitment ads and tools, we're able to work alongside Self-Care Catalyst to figure out what works, what resonates with the community, what doesn't, to listen to the community and really begin to tailor those engagement messages. And then secondly, we developed tailored education resources. And so the more we looked at the data, saw the engagement, saw the questions that were coming from the coach sessions, from utilizing the platform, we were able to, you know, adjust accordingly and really develop the tools that were so very needed from that community and tailor them very specifically to their needs. And then in the research area, as has already been outlined, I mean, we had so many key insights into what really matters most to those individual patients, and the ability to have both quantitative and qualitative data through a real world tool like this helped us to build the platform as well as the messaging to go forth and secure even more funds for translational research and for addressing these health inequities that are so evident and really getting to solutions. And so I think that there's a number of ways across all 4 of our pillars that this data has been utilized.
It's a good opportunity for me to remind the audience that there are 3 different downloads that you can access that dive a little deeper into the data and also provide you the slide deck. So please take a second to go over there to the handout section of your control panel and take a look. There's some 2021 data that comes out of this study that I think you'll find quite interesting. Renee, this question is for you. Have you worked with payers on this app, or who are you predominantly working with? Is it mostly advocacy organizations and pharma, or have you expanded into the payer group? And the reason I ask is we've got on our line today quite a number of representatives from health insurance companies and HTA audiences?
No, thank you, Patty. That's a great question. To date, most of our activities have focused on collaboration directly with pharma or industry and with patient organizations. But increasingly, we are starting to collaborate with payers and with large employer groups to provide our platform as a way to help patients manage their condition and also provide a mechanism to capture that data, which can be then combined with for example, claims data to look at what are the patterns of patient self-care activities that can really proactively avoid certain outcomes to improve the health outcomes of patients who are already in a treatment modality. And because we also have such rich insight from individual patients on their patient journey, we can also derive insights around things like treatment switches, to what extent providers are following standards of care or potentially prescribing things off-label and what effect that has. So it really does open an opportunity for unique approaches to real-world evidence studies to look at.
Oh, looks like we got a
pattern of treatment in the real world, as well as what those outcomes may look like and how it can vary.
Thank you. We had just a little bit of a blip on your Wi-Fi feed there, but we got almost everything that you said. And as you were talking, it strikes me, and I wonder what the audience thinks about this, is that it seems like this could be quite useful perhaps on value-based agreements or risk-sharing arrangements as a way to gain some insight into what's really happening with your patients that are enrolled in some of those outcomes-based contracts. We have a question from Christopher, and I think this would be best answered by Renee. Are you able to expand on the integration with external systems and devices?
Sure, absolutely. So we already have integration with certain device or data aggregators, things like the Apple Research Kit, Human API. So patients who have something like a Fitbit can easily add that device data to their own Health Storylines platform so that all of their personal data is together. And then as we did in this research with Allergy and Asthma Network, we can also integrate any specific APIs for devices such as digitally enabled inhalers, smart devices like scales, blood glucose monitors. So depending on the needs of a given indication, if there are any other biometric data that needs to be captured, that can easily be integrated into the prospective data collection approach. And then we can also bring in other sources of data such as EMR or EHR data, depending on which site network we may be working with, and also individual patients can also request that their EHR data be tied to their app. So there are really quite a number of ways that we can bring in external data.
Very interesting. Tanya, I know with all of your ranges of experience, you've done a lot of research over the years. What surprised you from this particular project?
You know, Patty, every single time that we have gone into these communities and listened, truly listened, took the time to ask the questions and listen to the responses, we've learned. And so I think that a couple of things, a lot of the assumptions that we make around underserved communities or disparities in care are wrong. They are faulty. But one of the key things that I think came through loud and clear is that when someone is operating in Maslow's hierarchy of needs, fight or flight baseline mode for housing security, food security, education basics, when they are in that fight or flight mode, they cannot engage in things like scheduling appointments 6 months out, self-actualization, self-empowerment. Those concepts are quite foreign when you're in that fight or flight mode. And so how do we have honest conversations and train medical providers to have more honest conversations around the identification of those barriers to care and the addressing of those barriers to care?
Such a good reminder. Renee, Is the Self-Care Catalyst platform compliant with HIPAA and with the CFR 21 Part 1?
It is, Patty, and we've also been able to use this platform in a variety of global contexts as well. So our regulatory compliance globally is all in place.
Excellent. What are some other ways that you would encourage, Tanya, organizations to interact with either your patient advocacy group or with other patient advocacy groups? What are some tips and tricks for pharmaceutical companies, other solution providers that would help make these very important interactions more successful?
Well, you know, we do have such wonderful partners that actually come from all different walks of life in the stakeholder group and community as a whole. But I think that it always starts with why. What is the main purpose? Why? What do we share in common? What are those mutually beneficial opportunities that are going to help us both achieve our mission and aim? And so that oftentimes is, you know, getting the right treatment to the right patient at the right time with the fewest barriers. It's reducing cost. It's ensuring that there is equity in healthcare. So it's coming to whatever that common ground is and then building from that foundation. I also think that so many times, you know, whether it be pharma or payers or even tech firms like Self-Care Catalyst, oftentimes don't think about the role of patient advocates and the community, and current company excluded, of course, but, you know, they don't really think about all of the facets of a patient organization and the way that the patient organization can come alongside and really to help support those mutually beneficial aims and goals. And that we are the trusted messenger oftentimes within a select community. And so there are many times that a family will call and confide or share their experience with us. We've been doing these PCORI listening sessions and dialogue sessions around recruitment and retention in clinical trials. And, you know, those families reach out and they're very honest about why they have or haven't participated and why they may consider participating. And so it's building those relationships over time and certainly addressing what I call the 3 E's: the emotion of the story, the evidence of the story, and the economics of the story. And if we can find a way to do all of that plus build relationship, then we're off to a great start for really moving the ball and making a difference in patients' lives.
Really good reminders. Thank you for that. Renee, has this platform been used outside the United States, and what kind of flexibility does it have in terms of language and also other cultural environments?
Yeah, absolutely. Our platform has been used globally, including multiple languages outside of English. And we do work with different teams to ensure that we have appropriate translations that maintain really the cultural and that sense of connection with patients as we go into different geographies. As many people know, you can't just use a Google Translator to change the technical dimension of a language. It's really important to continue to understand the needs of the patient and that you're communicating to them in a culturally sensitive manner. And of course, because in different countries, they may have different formularies or different standards of care, different sequences of treatment, and different healthcare systems, their journeys in different geographies will also vary. So we have a significant amount of experience helping teams understand the patient population, what the patient journey is, so that those bigger clinical studies can be designed in a sensitive manner that are more likely to succeed in all of those dimensions, from recruitment, engagement, to keeping those patients in the study in a way that they're excited to contribute.
Thank you. If we're having this exact same webinar 5 years from now, what are we going to be talking about in terms of patient engagement? I'm going to start with Tanya and then go to you, Renee.
I love this question, Patty. So I think that, I am the eternal optimist, and I am very hopeful that in 5 years that we, number one, are not thinking about the vast disparities that we see today in health outcomes. That zip code is no longer the number one social determinant around your health outcomes. But I also think that we'll be talking about the use of technology in such a greater way, a more intimate understanding of real world data collection, rather than designing clinical trials solely for regulatory approval, that this will be more translational medicine that will help us to implement the best science in our imperfect real world setting. And so to me, it's how do we continue to advance it and bridge the gap and move us forward in that way. And I think that we can do that through big data, artificial intelligence, the ability to look at these patterns over time, to have the remote monitoring tools to stratify the population in a meaningful way, and then tailor the approach more accordingly.
Very, very important. Now, Renee, you come from a background in forensic anthropology, which I absolutely adore and must go read much more about that. But I so know why your background is so important to the mission of Self-Care Catalyst and for your day-to-day work, engaging with these patients in that way. So anthropology is, in some respects, looking back and listening at the present. With that, what are you looking forward to in the next 5 years in terms of what we're going to be doing?
Yeah, well, I think one of the perspectives that I benefit from in terms of my background is really a comfort in working with the data that is available, as opposed to having the requirement to design studies from the ground up and start from scratch every time we have a question that we want to have answered. And so many times, currently, those studies are designed with the goals of a researcher in mind, or of a particular physician, or of a product manufacturer. And certainly those goals are directed at with the end mission of supporting patients. But at Self-Care Catalyst, we really are trying to drive a future that in 5 years, every patient is going to be empowered to bring their contribution, and that they will truly be at the center of this conversation, driving the questions that are asked and how the research is conducted in a way that facilitates their access to improved outcomes that is much more holistic. As Tanya said, having access to technology, being able to leverage the ability to distribute things like data collection tools, as well as just access to things like smartphones or stable internet connections to bring this data from patients that it's truly representative, not only from patients who may live close enough to a center for excellence for a given condition, but being able to really see patients represented across the board in a way that matters to them, and for the variables and the outcomes that they are looking for to be viewed with equal importance by research stakeholders.
Mm-hmm. Well, thank you both. This has really been quite illuminating for me, and I know that it has been for our audience as well, because I can see how much they're engaged with the words on the screen. I have that little insight on our webinar platform. And so I want to thank you both for a really wonderful discussion. And audience, if you would like to get in contact with the team there, you see some contact information. I'm going to give one more reminder to download those insightful documents that are in the handout section, and encourage you to reach out to our esteemed speakers today if you'd like to continue the conversation. Thank you, Tanya. Thank you, Renee. And with that, I will turn it over to Dana to close us out.
Thanks, Patty. And thank you to everyone for attending today's webinar, Patient-Centric RWE Research and Remote Monitored Care, Learnings from a Support Program Leveraging Telehealth and Connected Devices, sponsored by Self-Care Catalysts. Once you leave today's webinar, you'll receive a survey on today's presentation, and we would appreciate it if you would complete that and provide your feedback. You'll also receive a follow-up email shortly with a link to view a recording of today's webinar. On behalf of our panelists Self-Care Catalysts, and healtheconomics.com. Thank you for joining us today, and have a great rest of your day.